Hello, welcome to the City of Molalla Planning Commission meeting for May 7th, 2025. Please join me in the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you very much. Let's start with roll call. I guess we'll start over here. Start with Jessica.
Community Development Technician Jessica Worth, present.
Associate Planner Jamie Viveras, present.
Planning Commissioner Kristy Hodgkinson, present.
Commissioner Ornelas, present.
Commissioner Eaglebear, present.
Commissioner Ancell, present.
Commissioner Rickey, present.
Commissioner Potts, present.
Code Compliance Specialist Kyle Murphy, present.
Senior Planner Dan Zender, present.
Senior Planner with 3J Consulting, Violet Brown, present.
Awesome. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda for the meeting minutes of April 2nd, 2025?
Second.
Need a motion.
Yeah, first.
That's right.
Need a motion.
I thought you did that.
I said, may I have a motion?
I motion to approve the consent agenda for April 2nd, 2025.
Second.
All right, Jessica, can you call the roll?
Commissioner Ancell.
Aye.
Commissioner Ornelas.
Aye.
Commissioner Rickey.
Aye.
Commissioner Potts.
Aye.
Chairman Eaglebear.
Aye.
Thank you. It passes 5-0. 5-0-0.
All right.
Commissioner Hodgkinson. Kristy.
Aye.
All new.
It's a little off today.
It's a little off. So it passes 6-0.
All right, thank you. Presentations and such, I guess we have a bunch later as far as staff business. And then we have public comment. I saw a public comment. So what do we,
Yeah, there was a public comment submitted regarding the urban growth boundary presentation.
okay,
So it's just sort of general business comment, and it'll be added to the minutes meeting record.
okay,
It doesn't have to be read in.
okay.
General tenor was that they don't want the UGB to expand south.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we don't have public comment on anything else. So I'm going to read, now is the time to receive public comment on items not listed in the agenda. Citizens are allowed up to 3 minutes to present information relevant to the city but not listed as an item on the agenda. We do not have any currently for that. And then moving on to general business, it seems then. Don't have any hearings, so now we have general business. So first one up is Ms. Worth.
Thank you, Chairman. We are just recognizing Kristy Hodgkinson as the new chairman. That's not what I meant. The new commissioner, sorry. She was voted to Planning Commission by City Council at their meeting of April 23rd. And she is a member of the Parks CPC. She's been on there for 1.5 years. And welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, welcome, Kristy.
Let's switch order.
We'll get to know all of us soon enough. So, awesome. I don't have anything else there. Sorry. So welcome. Look forward to working with you as we go on. All right. Next item, the UGB presentation. Mr. Zinder, may we have your presentation?
So we're going to go a little out of order tonight. Brought the timeline instead of the presentation. So we're going to go on to the next one. We'll come back to next week.
Okay.
All right, we're on a
That's
call.
me, I guess.
Down to Kyle. So I guess we're moving on to the RV street parking ordinance discussion.
Cinder, the thumb drive is right there.
Hello, Planning Commission. So tonight, I have a staff report and a presentation regarding, can I just start, or do I need to?
Go ahead.
Okay, regarding recreational vehicle parking in Molalla. I'll read the first paragraph of my staff report here. Staff were directed by the City Council to address on-street storage of parking in camper trailers and recreational vehicles during this year's annual goal setting. The stated concern is that people are parking their trailers and RVs on the street and causing a hazard due to sight lines and bump outs interfering in the function of the right-of-way. So then, presentation on the screen. Here we go. Recreational vehicle parking in Molalla. The current parking standards in Molalla, as far as code compliance is concerned, it is complaint driven. There's a 72-hour time limit, just like every other vehicle. There's an exception of 10 days per calendar year in front of your own residence. The 10-day rule allows time to prep for vacation or a cheaper alternative for visiting guests and family. Molalla also offers a recreational vehicle temporary extended stay permit that could be used for the cheaper alternative for visiting guests and family. Any questions about the current standards before I move on?
How would you tell if they were there for 10 days in a year?
That's a good question. That's a great question.
That is the million-dollar question. That is why we're here.
I think that's what the compliance officer is for.
Yeah, so I mean, to sort of answer that question, the way it would be, technically you would need a photograph of it every day for 10 days, you know, showing that it's been there for that, to prove that in court. Other than that, you could take a photograph of it one day, then 20 days later photograph it again and ask, hey, has this been here the whole time? And then if they say yes, then, you know, you can use that too. But, so, yeah, great question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it said it's complaint driven, so again, how is that complaint driven if you have to take the picture? I mean, let's say there's one out there and I call and make a complaint.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after that?
So then that would begin the case. The case would be open, and then I would document and essentially go and get those pictures or evidence that it's parked over the time limit. Typically, it'd be handled by just speaking with the owner and explaining the rules. A lot of people don't know the rules, and they move them. And
Okay.
so some other cities in Clackamas County, some examples of how they handle this issue. On the more restrictive end, there are cities that say no parking, any trailer, camper, mobile home, boat, motorhome, or other recreational vehicle on any street or alley or highway for any amount of time. Other examples include parking these vehicles for 24, 48, 72 hours. The 10-day exception, the question that was just asked. How do we know if a trailer belongs to the resident or guest of the resident? How do we know if a trailer has not moved, or how do we know a trailer has not moved and returned to the site without continuous monitoring? How long is 1 day? These are some questions that may arise while enforcing the current code language. So, some considerations. Currently, campers, trailers, and RVs are subject to the same 72-hour rule as all other vehicles, with the exception of 10 days per calendar year, which creates an administrative burden when enforcing RV parking. City staff can revamp the current ordinance to eliminate the administrative burden. Other considerations, the new and improved ordinance can be less restrictive, about the same, or more restrictive. And then I have another feedback section here. How do you think RV, boat, etc. parking in the city should be regulated? If anybody has any feedback they'd like to give on that question. If not, we can move on to the next one.
I just have a question on the one that said the 10-day extension or whatever for a year is administratively burdensome.
Correct.
How is that quantified? What does that mean exactly?
It's sort of speaking to what we already spoke about, that you would need to go out there for 10 days back to back to back to document that, rather than it creates it's difficult to enforce is what I meant with that language.
Well, it wouldn't even necessarily be back to back. That's a calendar year. So you go out there for a whole year and see if you can catch it.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and then you're documenting. You know, if you get 2 days here, then you're documenting. Okay, this house is used 2 days.
Right.
And then you get that same house. You going back. They only have 8 days left.
Right.
So does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, but then for you to check on it, there'd have to be a complaint for you to go over to whatever street and go, okay, well, that's there. Now it's 2 days, and then what's the same one 3 months later, so that's 4 days. So, but again, it has to be complaint driven to begin with, correct?
Yeah, each one would have to be a new complaint, because after 2 days, if it's moved, then that's closed out. You know, that complaint's handled. They move the trailer, so then it would be a new complaint. You have to go back to the old complaint to see, okay, how many days
Okay,
of this.
now I understand the administrative burdening. Okay.
So I guess I should have questioned this. Is this based on 2 locations in town or the entire town? That's been the major issue.
I receive complaints about it all over town. I don't know whether this came to my desk based on one location or.
I'm specifically talking like Big Meadows, Lexington Estates, where they all have their own HOAs.
Yeah.
I think I think less government is better for the city. I think this needs to be driven to the HOAs and let them handle this on their own. And if they can't, then I think it's a city situation to take care of. Because HOAs already dictate what you can and can't do on your own property.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they should dictate what they can and can't do with campers and unmovable vehicles.
But the street isn't their property.
No, but they tell you what to do with it.
With,
And in HOAs, they do.
within the boundary of the HOA.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because they'll get you for having the wrong yard sign out there, let alone
Yeah,
camper
I've
in
never
front of
lived
your
in an
house.
HOA, and I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I just,
so I'm just saying.
okay,
but-
but then again, with that HOA driven complaint, do they go to the HOA or do they go to the code?
If it gets pushed to the HOA, then it goes to the HOA and it relieves the city of anything.
Okay.
Unless it
So
becomes a
this-
major issue.
So if you're saying if the city gets a complaint, the city could then just say, hey. shoot-
Exactly.
Nowadays, you just shoot an email over to
Correct.
them and say, hey,
Yep.
this is the document, this complaint, please take care of it. We might check on the status of it in a few days, type of thing.
Well, yeah, because I can see this being the bigger problem in those 2 subdivisions, because they have the smallest streets in town.
Okay.
So, just saying. I mean, that's my thought.
Versus elsewhere in town, it might not be that big of an issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I've seen, to your point, I've seen some on some of the older neighborhoods where, yeah, it's like this dude probably keeps it out there all the time and it's probably not an issue ever, but that probably wouldn't warrant a complaint, so it wouldn't have ended up on your desk anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I see this stemming from.
Well, and the RVs themselves, I mean, if we were to handle it as without the 10-day rule, it wouldn't be difficult. I mean, parking
Right.
complaints they're easy. It's that 10-day rule that really makes it
Right.
challenging.
So is this, you're talking RVs and trailers or specifically trailers? Because those are 2 different things.
RVs and trailers and boats and everything.
I think you need to break those up into individual categories, because I think you're gonna run into some issues like, this is an RV, this doesn't fall under this category, you know what I'm saying? Or this is a trailer, or this is a boat. I think if you're gonna go down this route, you really need to spit it out so the homeowners understand what's what.
Yeah, the definitions are listed in the code,
Okay.
and it lists all of them out. It says like a recreational vehicle means all of these things.
Gotcha.
Boat, camper, RV, trailer, all of those things.
And then what if if it comes back to the city, what if it's still hooked to a vehicle? Does that count, or does it amid some of this stuff? Is it, you know what I'm saying? What are some other cities doing around us that we can pull from if this becomes an issue for us? I'm just,
I've heard some, what they do is instead of having this hard rules, it's just, it has to be hooked up to your vehicle. If it's not, then it's in violation, which might be something I'd be interested in supporting if we were gonna go down that road.
So.
Possibly.
I'm still pushing it back to the HOA to relieve the city of it.
Sure.
I agree with the HOA aspect. I'm trying to I've been trying to think of like the general city.
But I think this is coming from 2 locations within the city.
Do you have like a map where it's at, or is he correct in assuming that it's primarily in these areas that are HOAs?
It's all over town, really.
Okay.
People just call them in when it's at a certain intersection, maybe blocking a stop sign. It does happen a lot in the HOA areas, and we have sent notices to the HOAs about this sort of thing as well. But I would say it's pretty spread out all through the city.
The problem with the HOAs, speaking from experience, is that they don't really seem to have they're not very good at enforcing their own rules. They do, they send you a letter, they lien your property.
Yeah, exactly.
People don't pay them.
Yeah, that lien's there forever, though, until they sell the house.
Yeah,
So eventually they're gonna pay. So.
yeah, but if that's all it is, that RV is never gonna get moved.
So,
Then it becomes,
Yeah.
in your guys' opinion, is 72 hours long enough or not long enough? For like if it was per instance, instead of 10 days per calendar year, like per instance that I need to park my trailer in front of my house, I'm allowed to have it there for 72 hours. Is that fair? Is that not long enough?
Fair.
Too long?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay.
I think it's fair enough.
So if we, instead of saying 10 days per calendar year, it's the same as every other vehicle.
So you're just looking to get rid of the 10 days?
The
Basically.
10-day thing seems.
We could just
kinda
drop
silly.
that off. It would make your job a lot easier.
That is where the issue is created.
Yeah.
I can understand why it was there initially too, like if there's a problematic area where, so he moves it every few days, but it's there.
Well, and
It's still there
different
2/3 of the year.
There's different ways to deal with that as well. Our
Right.
code specifies, there's ways to go about when people try and
move it,
Yeah.
bring it back.
move it 2 feet and bring it back. It's like,
Right.
no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work.
There are a corner lot where they just move it.
From one
the other
side to the
street.
other,
Yeah.
right.
The permit, so they can, if they had family, they do have a permit that they can get to stay for the 10 days if needed. They can
Correct.
just-
They can stay for 30 days with the permit.
Okay.
So that needs to be outreach.
Mm-hmm.
I was unaware the city had a permit that you could do that personally. So, I would suggest some kind of at least outreach on the Molalla Current or our Facebook, saying, hey, just a PSA sort of thing. I mean, summer's coming, might be a good time to do that. With family coming in for summer and stuff.
Okay.
Just food for thought.
And I think final thoughts on dropping the 10 days for 72 hours, I think is more than enough time for somebody to either load the trailer to get it ready to go, or RV or whatever, and bring it back to unload and take it wherever they gotta take it.
Okay.
That's if it can't fit on their property,
Yeah.
so.
Okay. Well, all my questions pretty much got answered. The other ones that were going to come up, I was wondering about the 24, 48, 72 hours, thoughts on that, excluding the per calendar year language, and then I was wondering thoughts on RVs off of streets completely. It sounds like that's not what we want with,
I don't see why the city should matter if they can fit it on their own property,
yeah.
as long as it's off the street. I think that's the bigger problem here, is getting these off the street. If they want to park it in their front yard, it looks gaudy, but that's up to them to do what they want. What's the city have to say what they can do with their property? So,
Well, that's my presentation.
Thanks, buddy.
If there's any other questions I can answer.
Would this come back to us with like a draft ordinance? Or?
Yes, if we get to that point.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I suspect the 10-day thing was sort of half-witted attempt to try to get at people who are living in them. But I was in that position before he was, and it was it was not fun to deal with that rule.
As the language sits now, is there a rule for where they place it on their property? Like, does it have to be behind a gate, or are there
No,
any
currently
rules?
there's no rule there.
Okay.
We have in our city code, there's language that says you can't park motorized vehicles on unimproved parking surfaces, so like your front yard, but it specifies motorized. So it's not motorized.
Exactly.
There's no language in our code that says it can't be parked wherever.
Okay. So
The other thing that could be a violation if it was dismantled, dilapidated, unusable.
That's a totally different
Right,
situation.
right, exactly.
Because some people who have these can't afford storage. So you shouldn't, in my opinion, shouldn't buy a trailer if you can't afford storage.
Okay,
Cool. Well, I guess that's it.
thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Kyle.
Kyle. Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
It's just my ADD, but I want it to work.
Did I just open the wrong one?
Yep.
No, I didn't. I had it here.
Dan, do you need me to stick around?
I think you're good to go if you want. I just took the wrong file off and this timeline. That's what we need.
So, assuming we're back to your presentation, Dan?
We are back.
All right.
There we are. Manipulate you there. Tab through.
Yeah, I do know this stuff, but not well enough to do it without slides
Slides provide so much context and pictures.
and maps.
So yeah, I won't belabor this too much. The stuff that was in my staff report is covered better in the presentation, but yeah, we're through the housing and economic analysis portions of the UGB process and on to actually looking at the UGB study area. City held a town hall style meeting on April 22nd to get public feedback on initial study area, mucking around. So the sub areas are created. We've looked at soils and other factors that are determinant of where the city goes. So we're in that, and now we want to present that to you guys. So I'll turn it over to Violet. She'll give you the details.
Nice. So hopefully this will make sense. Last time I was here, we were talking about the HPS. Now we get to kind of shift gears a bit. And welcome, Commissioner Hodgkinson. And shift gears to the UGB. So I got a little agenda here to kind of walk you through what information I'm going to give you guys today. Mainly starting with, why is the UGB being updated? Run through the background documents that you guys have already seen in terms of the economic opportunities analysis, the housing needs analysis, and the HPS. Talk about how we go about, according to statute, how we go about forming a study area to even look into UGB expansion. What the different land priorities are according to statute. And then this time I'll just kind of set the stage for what's called the Goal 14 location factors. There's 4 factors that the state requires us to consider when we're kind of comparing different parcels and saying, what's the, you do kind of a SWOT analysis. What's the strengths and weaknesses of going this way versus that way? And there's 4 different factors, and I'll kind of set that up this time. And then I'll come back next month, and we'll chat about the Goal 14, and I'll let you guys what I found when I actually kind of dug into the various parcels and looked at the different alternatives. As part of this project, you kind of see here the outline which we made last summer, our little timeline. Again, we've kind of finished the HPS. We're moving into the urban growth boundary. We've had 2 public meetings, one on the HPS, one on the UGB. We're going to continue to brief you guys. We're going to continue to brief City Council. We have our PAC. We have our TAC. So we're going to continue to work with all of our committees and get this information to you guys before the end of the fiscal year. This grant from DLCD that's funding this report and this research, it's to basically give you guys the analysis. It's not going to, by June 12th, have a new boundary, right? That's a longer process. I think the overall timeline of exploring the UGB goes through March of 2026. So my job is to use my formerly legal brain and my planning expertise to kind of give you guys, here's the statutes, here's the framework, this is the analysis you have to do. I've crunched the numbers, I've looked at the maps, this is where we sort of land. And then I kind of hand that over to you guys, and the process will continue into next year. So UGB expansion, this is probably not necessary for this crowd, but I kept this slide in from the public meeting. We did a public meeting on April 22nd. I think it went very well. You know, people feel strongly about this, so I felt like it was important to kind of show you guys how I presented just the concept of UGB. So we started with what UGB boundaries are not. That might be the easiest way to understand them, which is they're not city limits. They're not the same as being annexed into the city, which means that they don't immediately have any difference on your property taxes. So if somebody is not in the UGB now and they get included as part of the UGB with this boundary expansion, but they're not interested in selling their land, they're not interested in developing their land, they don't want to apply to be annexed into the city, then nothing really changes on their property. What can change, and this got brought up at the public meeting, and you may hear from it from your community. In fact, I hope you do, because I hope there's a robust conversation around this, because I hope people feel comfortable expressing themselves and really talking through all the ins and outs of this process. What you may hear is, well, but we may be forced, our hand might be forced. If all my neighbors annex into the city and I'm the lone standout, and down the road I need a permit from the county for a new septic tank. If my septic tank goes out, they won't approve the permit because I'm close to a sewer line and I'll have to go to the sewer line. And, you know, I just told your community, I said, you know, that may happen, right? Down the road, if you're in the UGB and all of your neighbors annex and they all develop, you know, we can't, and some people didn't like to hear, but we can't always tell our neighbors what they can and can't do with their land. And so again, you know, this is going to be a topic that's probably going to be very important to a lot of your community. And so, you know, I wanted to kind of present this up front and just make sure that we're being very clear about it. UGB as a planner, we think of UGB as a mechanism for preserving ag land, preserving forest and open space land, and trying to control sprawl. It is a way, one of the things that I told the community is it isn't a way to stop development altogether. It's a way to try to motivate cities. Sorry, I looked at you, Dan. Motivate cities to be efficient with the land they have and to really focus, motivate developers and cities to really focus on land that's already sort of urbanized and isn't our high-value farmland. Right, and so it's kind of a way to just kind of focus development on the land that we think makes the most sense for development, and try to leave kind of that unique and prime farmland as the like land of last resort. Right, so it's trying to kind of focus that. So the process is governed by statewide planning goal 14. You have to establish a land need for housing and employment. That's not necessary. You don't have to have both, but that's what we have here, so I have it up there. We've completed that process. You guys adopted the EOA. It says you need large parcels of industrial that you don't have within the UGB currently. The H&A said that you need land for about 2,000 more housing units in the future. So we have that land need established in adopted documents. Efficiency measures are next. Again, the city is required to show that they're using the land they currently have efficiently. Dan and I was mentioned last time when I was here, you guys, we did efficiency measures. There was rezoning of land within the urban growth boundary to make sure any kind of land, I think primarily land that was zoned industrial, that was never going to develop as industrial because it didn't really make sense, could be used for residential. And so a lot of that rezoning has happened. And then we go about us finding our study area, prioritizing our parcels, and establishing sub-areas to analyze, and then the Goal 14 factors. So again, the housing need, H&A said about 2,000 units, 1996. What it didn't do was count the developments that were in the pipeline. There were 287 developments, units that have been completed since the H&A was adopted. So we get to immediately take those off of the 2,000 because they've already happened to accommodate that growth. The other thing was the rezoning. So based on the rezoning, I'm going to get a little bit technical because I feel like you guys will be interested in this, or you might get questions on it. Initially, the H&A that was adopted used a safe harbor average of 7 units an acre when they decided how many housing units could be accommodated in the UGB. That's allowed. The rezoning was very heavily skewed towards higher density housing, which means that your rezoning actually accommodated a lot more of your need. And I wanted to make sure that that was reflected in the math. And so DLCD allows us to use the zones. And so say R1 is more like 5 units an acre. R2 is 10 units an acre, R3 is 20. So I got to look at the rezoning and say, in reality, how much capacity did you create by rezoning this industrial to R3? And so I came up with the number of units that we could apply to our need based on that. And I also had to redo the BLI a little bit to make sure we weren't doing apples to oranges. So I redid the BLI to say, okay, if I did the buildable lands inventory on that 5, 10, and 20, and I do the rezoning on 5, 10, and 20, realistically, as close to predicting the future as possible, how many units can you accommodate of that 2,000 in the UGB as it stands now after the efficiency measures? And when I did all of that, we come up with, we still need 928 units. I will tell you 900 of those are single family, our R1 need. Only about 30 units are R2, and there's no remaining R3 need. So the expansion will, by and large be for single family homes. So when we do the expansion and I say 928 units equals 182 acres, that's applying that 5 units an acre average to say how many actual acres of land are we looking to expand to in this expansion. For the employment need, you're not actually required to do all of the employment need. It's kind of up to the city. You're required to expand for housing need. But I think because the industrial need in the EOA was very clear, the city, we've looked through the EOA, what those findings were, and have landed on needing 2 sites over 20 acres for industrial, 4 sites in the 10 to 20, and I just pulled this from this table from the EOA. My firm didn't do it, so it's Johnson Economics. They did the EOA. That's their table. I included it for your review, but then again, we're looking to accommodate 2 sites over 20 acres for industrial land, 4 sites in the 10 to 20 acre size, and 4 sites in the 5 to 10. There's an excess of under 5 acres. We don't need to accommodate anything other than residential in under 5 acres. So now that we know what our need is, and we've adjusted it for everything that's happened since, including the efficiency measures, we draw a 1-mile buffer around the existing UGB. There's some reasons to draw a 1.5, but that's if you have some specialty kind of land hanging out right on that 1-mile border, and you have to kind of go and grab the whole parcel. So here's what 1 mile looks like in 1.5. I'm a maps geek, so bear with me. I threw in a ton of maps for you guys. So 1 mile, 1.5. We then set out excluding land. So we exclude things that are impractical to provide necessary public facilities. We're talking extreme slopes, things like rivers. And also anything, significant development hazards, again, those slopes, stuff that's just really not developable, we're allowed to not consider it for the expansion. Significant historical sites or natural cultural resources or any land owned by the federal government are managed for rural uses. And then when that's said and done, we have to make sure that our study area is at least, by statute, is at least twice the amount of land we need. So we have to show that we're considering at least twice what we need in terms of finding the best alternative. You can't just zoom into one spot and say, okay, we studied this area. You have to show you're studying at least double what you need and actually thinking about your alternatives. So one of the things we can exclude is something called rural reserves. That's land that's been designated for no development. It's protected to remain rural for the foreseeable future. And Molalla has a huge chunk of rural reserves to the north. And so I've included those there. Again, we've got major rivers and slopes. So we've got Kaiser Creek and the Molalla River, and the yellow, I guess that's yellow, peach, are slopes greater than 10%, slopes greater than 25 are in that orangey color. And we also look at historical landmarks. I believe these are century farms primarily, but you have there in yellow things that are listed on historic registries and would not be available for development. We then include wetlands. This is sort of interesting. There are certain wetlands, if they're on the state inventory, that are as significant wetlands. They are constraints for development. There's something else called hydric soils, which is not necessarily a constraint to development, but would be a consideration for expansion, because there's an assumption that hydric soils are actually wetlands. And there's quite a bit of hydric soils around Molalla. Okay, so then we end up with our final study area. It is twice the amount of land we need. So then we move into something called parcel prioritization. So the statute gives us 4 priorities. First priority are urban reserves, lands that's been set aside for urban use. There's no urban reserves around Molalla. The second of the first priority is something called exception lands. And again, there's approximately 580 acres to the south, which I know is not everybody's favorite direction. I'll say from the beginning, and having stayed here after and talked to people at the public meeting, I did not make up exception land. I did not designate the land to the south to be exception land. If I was designating exception land, I would not designate it to the south. But what that means is that land has been given an exception by the county for exclusive farming use. So it's land that has urban uses on it and has gotten an exception from the county that doesn't have to be used as farmland. The trick with that is, once that happens, it then becomes the city's first avenue that they are required to go to, because if it already has urban uses and isn't going to be used as farmland, then it's the land of first resort, that the land that the city has to extend. If they're going to expand, that's where you got to go first. It's first priority when you look for expansion. If you can't meet all of your need in your exception land, or the exception land is, for some reason you can show that it's severely not suitable for development, there's a little bit of exception land that's kind of away from the existing urban growth boundary, you're not going to have some cherry stem all the way out to get this exception land. That doesn't make sense. But if it does make sense and it's along your existing urban growth boundary, it's your first priority. If you can't meet all of your needs, you go to your second priority. Molalla has no second priority land around it. Third priority is farmland that's not designated as high value. Again, if you talk to any of your neighbors after the public meeting, I did not say bad farm versus good farm. I just said that there are things that are designated as prime and unique soils in Oregon that are, for some reason, we have decided that they are extra special. I'm not a farmer. I don't know a lot about soil. I'm from Louisiana. It's all wetlands where I'm from. So, I don't know much about it, but, from personal experience. But again, there is a designation of certain farms as having that prime and unique soil, and that is land of last resort, very last resort. So again, there's third priority and then fourth. So when I look at this, we have your exception land and then all of your resource land, which we're going to apply this prioritization to. I included the county zoning, so you can see that that land is technically zoned, to the south is zoned rural residential farm forest, 5 acre, our farm forest, 10 acre. But again, it's been given an exception that they can have urban uses there. So again, that's a county. It was done ages ago, I think, that designation was placed on that land, that they are given an exception that they can have urban uses. So this gives you your high value farmland, which is basically almost everything else around Molalla, except you can see those holes in the map along Kaiser Creek. Oddly enough, those holes are third priority land. Again, because they are not high value farmland, basically because they're wetlands, they then become an earlier priority than that high value prime and unique soil farmland. None of that is directly next to the urban growth boundary, though. It's all on the other side of Kaiser Creek, so it probably, in terms of third priority, won't even come up. It's going to be a question of exception land and then looking at the high value farmland. Again, these are all of the technical designations of what counts as high value farmland. We've got those prime and unique soils. We look at high value crops. They classify all this different type of soil. I've learned more about Dayton soil, which apparently you guys have all around, all to the east. I had to learn about that. It's technically a fourth priority land. It's part of that fourth priority, but if we're comparing two bits of land that are both fourth priority, if one's Dayton and one's high value prime and unique, you're going to go with the Dayton before you're going to go with the prime and unique, according to the statutes. So I've mapped out the high value crops. We've got Christmas trees and grapes and hops, various things, so we're required to look at that. Again, I've got that hydric soils in there. It's kind of a double-edged sword because you look at the hydric soils to say what kind of impact might development have on wetlands and water systems and drainage and all of that. But again, it's also not considered prime and unique farmland. So we kind of land on what our constraints are. Sorry, I skipped over. What our constraints are, we think about, we've already given our prioritization to all of the land in our study area. The next part of the process in terms of analyzing it is to apply the suitability criteria. So we look at, is land super parcelized? Are there statewide planning goal 5 protections for natural resources that need to be taken into consideration? Are we looking for land for industrial uses? Well, then we look at the slopes. You can't have over 10% slopes for industrial use. We look at public facilities, conservation easements, access to, is there a church, a school, or cemetery, or an airport listed, or airstrip, which is relevant to Molalla. Those areas might be not suitable for development. And goal 14, like I said, they give you 4 factors when you're doing your SWOT analysis of one location versus another. The first is an efficient accommodation of land need. Second is public facilities, right? Does one area give you a more economic or orderly expansion of public facilities than another area would? The third one looks at environmental, economic, social, and energy consequences, like how do your different areas and options match up when you're grading them on that issue. And then the last one, 4, is compatibility with nearby ag uses, right? If development goes this way, how's it gonna impact farms? We look at things from like, I've, taken statements from farmers for other projects where they're saying, hey, I'm moving heavy equipment on the roads, I'm doing that, I can't have people trespassing in my fields, various things where we say, okay, maybe one alternative over another might score better in terms of having less of an impact on agricultural uses around Molalla.
So I think notably with those, can I just jump in?
Yeah.
You're doing the goal 14 analysis, but if you're in a category 1, you can't jump from like a category 2 to a category 1 because you meet those criteria.
Right, so you have to prioritize.
Compared to itself.
And then, so again, I said the first priority, you've got 580 acres. And I threw out numbers like, I think the Johnson Economics said that they think that the sites necessary total up to maybe 120 acres of industrial, 180 acres of residential. You've got 580 acres of exception lands to the south. As we do this analysis, it may be that not all 580 are going to end up being developable acres, right? So, but again, you can't look out of the first priority land unless you're bringing all the first priority land in. So if you bring it all in and you still have remaining need, you can go to second priority. But in terms of how to decide, even within the 580 acres, we have to apply these goal 14 factors, right? To say, okay, well, if we're only looking for 180 acres of residential, where in those 580 are 180 acres? And so you basically grade various chunks against each other using those goal 14 factors. So I've drawn chunks. We presented the sub-area analysis to the public at the meeting. So the PAC has seen this, the TAC has seen this, and the public has seen this. What I really wanted to do was, and it worked because I had one owner come up to me and say, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but you cut my land in half. Half of my parcel is in the study area and half is not. And I said, well, that was definitely not intentional, so we fixed that. We tried to keep maybe neighborhoods together. We tried to keep things that are similarly used together, just so common sense. You'll see sub-area 1 is a park. It's you're going to help me. Dan's going to help me with the name of the park.
Yeah, Ivor Davies Park.
Davies, thank you.
That's to be brought in as a park.
Yeah, so that's a city-owned
Deed
park.
restricted. It's
a city-owned park. It needs to come in. So I made it its own sub-area, so we're not really kind of comparing it to other things with other uses. And then you'll see sub-area 2, and I've got the acreage on there. Again, there are rules about how you draw these sub-areas. They have to all the land within a sub-area has to have the same priority. So I can't kind of sneak in high-value farmland with my exception land, say in study area 4, and have it, kind of, if I'm going to consider a chunk of land together, they have to all be apples, right? It can't mix and match within it. And so I've drawn these 7. This is all the exception land. Now, since we haven't done the math yet, as we go through each sub-area, and since I know there is a lot of public support for not going south, and because I know from looking at this map, that there are no parcels over 20 acres in the exception land that could be used for industrial, I went ahead and drew sub-areas all around the city for study. Yes?
So as far as partials being over a certain size, why does that matter coming in? Because developers are going to buy up what they need depending on who owns it.
Yes, but what I'm tied to is the fact-finding in the EOA. And the fact-finding in the EOA says in order to accommodate the employment sectors that would be attracted to coming to Molalla and with jobs, and that what you're missing in your economy is large parcel industrial. And so It doesn't mean that they can't buy up smaller parcels and combine them, but I do think that might be a hurdle in terms of economic development. The EOA says, you know, what you want to have as supply for your employment land would be these at least 2 parcels that are kind of larger in size, easy for development, attractive to industrial users, in order to get the jobs that the EOA predicts.
Yeah, so, you know, one thing that you can look at is, you know, if Bob owns 2 parcels next to each other and they add up to 20 acres, you could consider that for that.
If
But
it's the
but
same owner.
if it's Bob and Jeff, you can't assume that Jeff's gonna sell at the same time Bob wants to sell.
If the money's right, but yeah.
Yeah, again,
You
you're
gotta
not
up their offer
wrong.
to Jeff, that's all I'm saying. I know.
I'll say this, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
And but in terms of I think the EOA, one of the things they're trying to get ahead of, and I won't speak for Johnson Economics, but one of the things they're trying to get ahead of is it's a lot easier if somebody's looking across Clackamas County for a large industrial site and they want to bring jobs somewhere, and sitting over here is a 25-acre
Well, absolutely.
spot,
One person.
and here, right. So it's like it's not that you can't cobble together, right? It's absolutely possible, but you have to negotiate with multiple property owners at the same time, get everybody to agree, figure it out, and sometimes that's just too messy, and they end up going somewhere easier. So the EOA says you need these spots. Again, the city is not required by statute to have to accommodate those lots. But if you want to, and I think that there's been indication that you want to, then you have the backing in the EOA to say, yes, there is a need. Residential need, you don't have a choice. If the residential need says, hey, you're growing, you're and again, this is something you may hear from your neighbors, because I don't know if anyone has quoted me, but I did sort of blurt out, because that's what I do, because I'm from South Louisiana, and that's just sort of what we do. I just sort of blurted out because somebody said, hey, who voted on the growth? I don't want to grow by, 2,000 more homes, and that's not what I want. And I said, well, you can't really tell your neighbors not to have kids. You can't really tell families not to grow. And sometimes growth, having come from a small town in South Louisiana, sometimes the growth is somebody finishing high school, finishing college, and wanting to return to the town where they grew up, or wanting to live and wanting to be able to afford a house. It's not necessarily, people coming down the highway with their suitcases, although that is also, also growth, right? But what PSU in their population, and maybe Emilio went into this in the HOA, H&A, I don't know. Sorry, you got me saying HOA. I hate saying HOA. H&A, maybe they went into this, but it looks at birth and death rates is really what's driving the population predictions for the future. So this is saying, and what I told the public at the meeting, what I told the community was, what the state requires you to do is to not just avoid the idea of growth. You have to get ahead of it, and you have to say, if this happens, where do we want it to happen? Otherwise, it just happens on its own, and it just happens willy-nilly without a lot of thought put into it. So what I said is, you don't get to vote on growth. That's the bad news. But the state isn't requiring you to build homes, because people say, if you build it, they'll come, kind of thing. It's like, well, we're not building empty homes and inviting people to come. We're just showing that we have enough land, that if people want to buy land and build a house in Molalla, that's possible without driving up prices and making it super unaffordable. So what I'll be doing this month is looking at each of these sub areas, looking at where do we have large parcels that make sense for industrial in terms of the 10% slopes. Where are the 10 to 20 acre parcels, and primarily, again, I have to start my analysis in that 1 through 7, in that exception land to the south, and I have to figure out, and I'll take each chunk and write up an analysis for you guys on what are the pros and cons of how much residential can it fit, what are the environmental impacts, what are the impacts on local agriculture, what are the impacts on public works and infrastructure, And then down the road, it'll be up to the city to then carve out a boundary. And you don't have to say, okay, we're going to take 2, 3, and 6. It can be any portion of them. This is just a way for me to get you guys that SWOT analysis for all of these parcels through there where you can see where expansion makes sense. What we did with the public is I gave out a paper handout at the registration table. You may have seen it. It was an FAQ. It was 1 page front and back with all the information I have over what is a UGB, why does it happen, what does it mean, how do you get involved in the process, all the stuff. We also had a paper handout that had a number of these that had the sub area maps and a place for people to write comments and turn in their comments where they can say, hey, sub area 6 doesn't make any sense. I live there. This is what it is. This is how it's being used. We don't want to be included. I will say not wanting to be included is not one of the location factors. But I did take that into consideration when drawing the sub areas, right? If there's an existing neighborhood or existing group that really doesn't want to come in, you know, it makes sense to consider that as one area and look at the pros and cons of it versus other areas that might be closer to the UGB border as it stands now, and we can really look at that. The handout where they have the maps with the comment cards, with the comment areas, that's online as well. We've had 30 responses online, and that'll be open till the end of the week. Everyone's invited to write comments. You don't have to comment on every sub area, but if you know something particular about it, whether it's crops, whether it's wetlands, whether it's the road is super trafficky and can't handle more. There was a lot of talk about ODOT and roads at the public meeting. There was a lot of talk of water. You guys have a very robust community who came and ready to ask questions and talk about these details. But again, that's online. People can give their online comments. It's still up. And I've asked Dan to maybe do a push on current.
We've got a neat web link that leads
wonderful.
to that, although you have to jump out of your presentation.
Oh, okay.
We'll show that in a minute.
So the public meeting, you know, we gave out the handouts, we gave out comment cards. I gave this whole presentation. I gave them all the information I gave you. We had about 100 people attend. Not everybody signed the sign-in sheet, but we did a head count. DLCD was here. They were very pleased with how it went and the conversation. Mac was great. Kind of ran around with the microphone answering people's questions. And again, the online survey, I've already made a few minor tweaks to the sub areas based on the feedback I got from the public. And, you know, we stayed late. I mean, we were here until like 9:30, still chatting with people. This is a little highlight of what I'll come and show you guys next time. So this is, again, the goal 14 factors. The first location factor is efficiency, and that looks at proximity to the existing UGB, parcel size, and how much actual buildable land you would get if that's the expansion, right? If you're going to expand for 100 acres, but there's only 30 buildable acres on it, then that's not an efficient expansion of the UGB. This is sub-area 2. It's right there by the park. And as you can see, what I've included in the document, in the report that you'll get, we'll have a zoom in of each sub-area and then a list of the factors and a list of the kind of like analysis. How does it stand up to other areas on this? Again, 1 being efficiency, 2 being public facilities. So I'm working with the city to get location of sewer, water, streets, you know, get these maps really fleshed out for all the public works aspects of it so that I can analyze one area versus another. And then the environmental, economic, so we'll talk about, you know, is it close to schools? Is it close to shopping? Does it make sense as an expansion? And then 4, the impact on local agriculture. So you'll get a zoomed in of each of the sub areas. Yep.
Question for you.
Yep.
I see you're going to break it down to acreage. Are you actually using county maps or Google Maps?
That's an excellent question. We're using GIS.
The GIS data comes from the county, and
Okay.
Comes from the
it's based
county.
on, you know,
Partition sizes.
parcels.
Parcels.
Well,
Parcel
parcels in
levels.
this case.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so, and what I've asked them to do is I have a lovely GIS team, one of whom I worked with. I've been with 3J for 2 years, but I was with Fregonetti Associates for 10 years before that. She was there with me there, so I've worked with her for for going on 12 to 15 years. And she's our GIS supervisor, and she helps me crunch all these numbers. And one of the things I'm looking for are parcels that are over, if I say it's 10 to 20 acres, I want to know that that's 10 to 20 acres of land buildable for industrial use. Otherwise, I'm not going to highlight it as a potential parcel that could accommodate that need. You know, again, if it's 21 acres and it's all wetlands, then, you know, it's not useful, it's not a candidate, right, for meeting your industrial need. So again, there's a question of the total acres, and then I have them calculate for me in GIS the buildable acres when we put in certain parameters. Residential parameters are a little bit different. They're not as strict as industrial. Yeah. So I'll come back. I'm going to give this same presentation that I gave to you guys. I'll brief City Council next week on everything we've done so far. I will continue to work on this Goal 14, those location factors, and analyzing each of the study areas, sub-areas, and I'll present that material to our PAC, our Public Advisory Committee, our TAC, our Technical Advisory Committee, where we have ODOT, DSL, we have soils experts on our TAC, and they get way into the weeds, pun intended, on all this stuff, and I just try to catch all their nuggets of wisdom and all that. So we'll talk with them about the location factors. We'll refine what we know based on their feedback, and then I'll come and talk to you guys June 4th and present those findings. Mainly, again, it's going to be 1 through 7, where I'm going to give you really in-depth on all 4 factors of that, all the exception land. And then I will look ahead and say, if you go outside of the exception land in the future, if you have more need, here are some larger parcels and where they might make sense according to the location factors. Because I want to give you guys some analysis of the land that is to the north, because I know from talking to the public, there's a lot of interest in that. So I want to give you as much of my analysis as I can wedge into this grant, so that you have it before you, right? So that when you go down the road to make a decision, you've got some of this parcel analysis, you have it sort of mapped out, and I've left you with as much information as possible.
You can, yeah. Personal preference, I know 14 and 15 are going to want to do anything. And I mean, just because they're my neighbors, and I've talked to them all about this, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and again, I think that we had a really good meeting. There were people who felt very strongly, who got kind of agitated, I think, and upset, and that's fair, right? That's important. I'm glad those people are there. I'm glad they're standing up and speaking, because there are neighbors who want to develop and want to get the most out of their land in terms of financial or whatever it is. And there are people who want quiet enjoyment of their land as well, and that's why they came out here. So again, there's going to be that push and pull and that tug, and I think people were really respectful. People gave their opinions. It was important that everybody hear it, so I think it was a good event. So and I hope for more kind of positive engagement around this issue. Someone brought up that they thought that Eugene did a really good job of with their expansion and didn't expand for a really long time, and I was able to tell them, well, good, because they use the same exact state rules that we're using. They were bound to the same exact rules that we're applying to Molalla. So if you like the way it turned out in Eugene, good news. That's what we're trying to do here as well. So.
Oh, and for the record, we did check their website after that meeting, and the environment post House Bill 2001 is much different from the environment prior to it, where now that we have that on the books, that you're actually compelled to bring the residential land into the UGB. Yeah. And so Eugene has actually updated their information saying, we are doing these H&As, and if we need land, we will be bringing it in because we have to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And again, a lot of that's for affordability, because you run out of land, and all of a sudden nobody can afford to live in Molalla. I say quietly under my breath. Any questions? You know, I love coming and talking with you guys. You know, always have good questions.
This is more of a technical question. It's just my curiosity. I don't know why it's a random thing. It's just random. But when you're showing the wetlands, I saw a lot of streams and rivers and stuff. Is that including like the riparian areas, buffer zones, or not?
Yes. I'm going to say yes without having it in front of me. Because if I remember correctly, here we have, they've marked in deep red, deep green, or that bright green is the river. We had this whole conversation of how far from the river, how far from the creek, and our GIS people followed all of those kind of requirements. So it isn't just the.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. I'm blanking on the name now, but there were all kinds of names. We were starting to look up again. You know, what is this terminology around the stream bed versus the stream crest, or the, you know, and there is like a certain amount of feet from the high water line and things like that you have to
Just my
consider.
experience, I'm just used to, you know, certain construction projects that get near any sort of pond or watershed or anything like that. We have those buffers. So I just didn't know in a larger scale if that was still applied.
Yeah, and I think that there was also a conversation, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think on the east side, there's wastewater, is it? There's the city leases.
Oh, it's not, yeah, there's the effluent water.
Oh, okay.
So it's not the wastewater, but it's actually effluent. The Coleman's fields.
Coleman Ranch.
Yeah, the Coleman Ranch.
Yeah.
Fields. I'll also add that this is based on the statewide wetlands inventory. So local wetlands inventory hasn't been done, and that's basically a later phase that we will be doing local wetlands inventory once we sort of narrow the search down. We won't be doing it on the whole study area.
Right, and again, in my effort to get you as much information as possible, that's what that hydric soils, all the brown, are the things that we had someone on our TAC from DSL. She's from DSL, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jevers
Mentioned. She said, you know, I'm concerned that some of these sub areas, like the zoomed in map I just put, that was almost all brown. The green is the state wetlands inventory, right? And she said, I'm concerned that some of this, when you get to actually concept level planning and bringing it in and zoning it, you're going to end up with your inventory realizing that it's locally significant wetlands.
But then I'd have to say, yes, Jever, but that's why I put it all in sub-area 2.
Right, and so I was like, yes, well, that's why we have mapped the hydric soils, which are the best thing that we can use to kind of predict whether or not it's actually going to turn out to be wetlands. So if it's brown, it's not a wetlands constraint in terms of it's excluded from consideration. But again, if you're weighing, do I go this way or that way? If one way is all hydric soils and you feel like I could go that way, and then because of the way administratively it happens, you end up doing an inventory and it ends up being a locally significant wetland and you can't develop on it anyway. You know, if you've got two options, all things being equal, and one's hydric soils and one's not, you go the other way, right? So I'm trying to get you guys, again, as much information to kind of set you up for making the best decisions that you can. Any other questions about the event, about what we're going to do next or what we're doing now?
I find it funny on the map, you got this one little exception way out there on Maxburg Road.
Oh, I didn't, which one's
It's
that?
way out there.
Oh, this little guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's still Maxburg?
That's Maxburg.
All right.
Fascinating. There's a reason why, again, because of the sequencing, and as somebody who used to practice law, I can laugh at a lot of the way that laws are written and what makes sense. I mean, I was sitting here during the RV thing going, well, you know, and I was like, Violet, keep your mouth shut. Sit on your hands. You're not part of this decision making. But again, the way the sequencing happens is you can't exclude that until that suitability, where I'm like, it's not practical.
Gotcha.
You've got this exception land, but it's way out there. Because it's contiguous with rural reserves, it has to stay at like consideration, but then I get to take it out. There is the land to the west, again, that I've been told that doesn't quite touch the UGB. It touches the UGB right on the edge, there on the other side of the 213.
Isn't that the airport?
It's the airport. So, again, you saw that suitability. One of the things that's listed is airstrip. And there are some homes around it, so we have to do a deep dive into, you know, and if the homes, according to the LCD, if the homes are attached to the airfield or related or somehow companionable, I think is the word they use, to the airfield, then they're considered part of it, and then they're also not considered for development. And so I did get to go in on Google Maps and saw some hangars on some of the homes. So I think we're going forward with the assumption that that land will not need to be considered and won't need to be brought in as part of that first priority. So again, if we bring in the 580 acres of first priority across the south, and there somehow mathematically still remains some need, it doesn't mean that you'll have to go to the rest of that first priority land because it's that airstrip. There's another little chunk that isn't part of the airstrip, but it's actually not touching the UGB. So again, it would be sort of a cherry stem out to go get that, and thankfully they recognize that that's not practical, and we wouldn't be required to do it. So again, if there is some, whether it's industrial or residential need, that still remains sort of mathematically after we look at all those 580 acres, you can start to consider other land. So but again, in your case, mathematically, I believe that's only going to be for the 20 plus acre parcels of industrial that are not located in the first priority land.
But that would be sub-area 11, Big Meadow number 2, that got turned down 25 years ago.
10, 11, and 12, I think there's the kind of go. I'm not going to get ahead of myself here. But yeah, I think more so, I think 10, 11, and 12 is the part that a lot of people are talking about that makes the most sense for the city to expand, instead of, say, 17, 18, and 19 over to the hydric soils over to the east.
That's going down by Shady Dell, so yeah.
Yeah, so I think in terms of like being near other, we look at compatibility with existing uses, and if you're,
Yeah, I just know from personal experience, 11 tried to come in 25 years ago, and the city turned them down. So
It's a long time ago.
it is a long time ago, but that was Big Meadow 2, 11.
But now there's a treatment plant and a Safeway and lots of other
Exactly.
stuff that's developed out that way.
They got a
So again-
roundabout right there for it.
Again, it's been in the comp plan
Yeah.
for a long time that the city should expand south. And I think that now there's a lot of kind of pushback to that people don't want to expand south, that it doesn't make sense. But again, that's been sort of on the books. That was the original plan. So if we're changing plans, you got to kind of have a factual basis, right, for why it no longer makes sense. And so from my standpoint, my job is to get you guys that location analysis, that suitability analysis, to really see, can I give you something that makes sense and is legal?
South
And
is
it's
perfect.
legal.
I'm not giving legal advice. I'm saying as a planner that it follows the statute, it follows the protocol. We've done the analysis we're required to do. Here are your options. That's where we hope to land in June, and then you can spend the next year picking it apart and figuring out where to go.
So does it make sense to add land that is very near industrial land for
If you're,
residential?
right, if you're looking for industrial, then you want to go near industrial, you want to go near freight or highway, or, you know what I mean, like transportation access. You look at slopes, you look at infrastructure, that the roads can handle it, that it makes sense. It doesn't make a total amount of sense to go right next to residential. But again, if we use 180 acres of the 580 for residential, in the first priority and you still have an industrial need, you gotta find it in the first priority before you look outside of the first priority.
So Commissioner Potts, I think what you're getting at is that if you expand to the south, you're potentially putting residential
Right,
next
that's
to
what I was getting at.
to
Yeah.
zone industrial. And unfortunately, it does get to that prioritization of land. On a staff level, we are talking to our legislators, because some of the urban design stuff about going south doesn't make sense with where our existing infrastructure
Yeah.
is. I think that and the serviceability
And
is
that's part of
questionable.
it too, because I think it's gonna require pumping.
Yes.
Right, and the overall cost, I mean, these are all sort of factors
Yeah.
that we're considering internally.
Yeah, Commissioner
but-
Potts, that's a really good point.
Unless there's something that happens above our heads and we are looking at those options,
We're stuck.
you know,
Yeah, so
we could pass an ordinance to go somewhere else and then, you know, it gets
Yeah.
kicked back to us.
And again, that's an excellent point. I think that we have been told just point blank that building a new pump station isn't a prohibitively expensive thing, like if we're
'cause that's on
talking
the
about
builder.
expansion. If we're talking about expansion, it doesn't mean it's an immediate no, right? If it
right.
requiring a new station, he's like, cities build state, you know what I mean? Sometimes you need to build a new station. If cities expand, it doesn't mean it takes it off the table. It is a factor. It is a factor. So again, efficient and economic use of public facilities. So we will be working with Public Works to try to make sure that when I write up, either on these maps or in the text, when I write up the kind of SWOT analysis for these areas, that we're being realistic around what the impact is on public facilities, and what would be required, how expensive would it be to, now again, all things being equal, you know, if, you know, I can't say, no, you can't put any industrial here because it'll be near some existing residential. Therefore, we're gonna go to fourth priority land that's not near residential. You know, we have to look at that first priority. Again, so you can go up and talk to legislators. You can go sort of the other way, get smaller. Property owners can go and try to have their exception land designation removed. Nobody wants to do that, I've been told, because you have to say, no, my land is not developable. And, you know, just really shoot yourself in the foot in terms of your property value. So nobody wants to do that, but again, it's been designated as an exception to the farming uses, and it's been allowed to develop with urban uses outside of the urban growth boundary. So if the urban growth boundary expands, you gotta go there first, because it's the lowest in terms of the things that, you know, the statutes are trying to protect. It's the furthest away from the prime and unique soils.
And maybe you know a little better than I, but my understanding is going the other way and getting a resource designation changed is virtually impossible as well.
Yeah, so I've just been told in terms of the options, that technically you could, you know, but that would come from property owners. The property owners themselves would have to
Right.
negotiate with the county to have the distinction removed. But again, you either have to say it's like not developable, or I'm using this as prime, but like exclusively for farm use, and if you're not, you know, so again, there's reasons. So I've tried to explain exception land. It's in the FAQ. There's a memo that I wrote up about all the stuff I presented tonight that was in your packet. It's on the website. People can read through it. Again, I didn't invent exception land. I didn't do this designation. But you know, I'm just trying to do the best with what we have and get you guys as much information as you possibly can get to try to make these distinctions. Any other questions? I can talk about this all day. But people want to go home.
We do.
I don't have any other questions. Somebody got any?
I got none. Very well.
Zender, there's a survey.
That's right.
Yes.
We should
Oh,
we should put
you
that
were
up.
going to show something.
Yeah, I can,
I did not
Get
make
that
a
for
QR
those.
code. I do not have the technology. I'm
You
old
can email
school.
me, I'll send you one.
is it up there?
No, someone in my office.
Did I take this off? Oh dear.
I work with lovely people who understand how to make online surveys and QR codes.
Aha,
I usually just
think
tell
I
them when
found
I
it.
was an attorney, we
this it?
only got to use Word. Planners use Photoshop, and I was
Nope.
like, attorneys don't
You
get
must
to
have
use
closed it out.
It's frowned on for
Find it?
attorneys to use
Oh,
Photoshop.
I closed it up.
Mine was all Word documents.
Yep.
But it's on the,
Go to the Molalla Current.
there was, on the handout was a QR code that people could scan. It should be, and the link to the survey is on Current, and it should be on the city's Facebook.
You could pull it up on our Facebook, yeah, so Friday is the last day to fill out the survey, so I did blast it out on Facebook today
Thank you.
and Instagram.
And again, this is really good, and I tried to really hammer this idea home with the public when we met. You know, when I'm talking about I got to write up impacts on existing agricultural uses nearby in each of these things, in a place, on parcels of land I don't live on, right? I don't commute on that street. When my hometown in Louisiana was our client, which lovely happened at my last firm, I got to get a job with my hometown. I was able to go on the map and say that street floods every time it rains. So I knew that stuff. I don't know that stuff for this. So that local knowledge, getting people to say, hey, I commute or I own a farm here. I have to use it. These are my harvesting seasons. These are when I'm, would be the impact on me. And we've done. My firm worked on the one for Canby, and I worked on it, and I did, Zoom calls, telephone calls with local farmers, and really got into the details on how they use their land, what it would mean to them to have a development across the street, and I can really put in that information into the report. And with these Goal 14 SWOT analysis, again, if you're looking at two things that are of equal value, and one of them you've got good context where you have testimony, from the property owners about how difficult it would be to have a subdivision across the street from their farm, then I can put that in, and that can be a factor, right? Again, it doesn't get you to say, okay, well, we're not going to go there, we're going to use high-value farmland, that's not first priority, but it does get you to be able to make some decisions among, apples to apples. All things being equal, you can kind of steer a different direction. So getting that information from the public is really important, and that's the kind of stuff I left open-ended. They're not like, give me a 1 to 5 or thumbs up, thumbs down, do you like this, do you like this? It is like, tell me what you think, open-ended comments, and I will be sitting and reading through them and trying to get those kind of nuggets of information that can really help us make some decisions. All right, that's all I got.
All right, that was a lot.
Sorry.
No.
I get that a lot.
No, we did.
We're used to it.
Sorry, Dan, she cut into your time, so.
We're not doing the last one.
This is gonna be it for today.
I know, I was thinking MACAPs, did I get a chance to?
Well, thank you for all of that information. We look forward to seeing the continuing reports. Appreciate that.
Do you need my chair?
Good, good. Just chatting with him on this one.
Okay.
All right.
And one more thing from Mr. Zinder. Like
You have 5 minutes.
That's all I want to take, frankly. If I take more than that, something's gone wrong. So this was, I just want to point out, this was initially put in with a typo. It's Senate Bill 1537, not the House Bill 2038 or whatever it was. But yeah, this is a discussion on Senate Bill 1537, and specifically the impact that it'll have on operations of our planning commission, because there's this pretty substantial piece in that. So the short of it is, the Oregon legislature passed the Senate Bill 1537 in the 2024 regular session. The major piece of that, that sort of was the public-facing major piece of that, was that it established the HAPO, the Housing Accountability and Production Office. That dovetails with a lot of my work and a lot of the work that comes to you ultimately with implementing the housing production strategy, and they're going to be overseeing grants with regards to housing, technical assistance. So the majority of the bill dealt with that aspect of it, but the reason I wanted to bring it here is to make sure it's something you're aware of, because it's going to drastically differ how we process applications. But basically, there's section 45.2 stated that a limited land use decision is not subject to the requirements of ORS 197.797, and that's the section that lays out the quasi-judicial process. So limited land use decisions, including things like design review and non-conforming use, and partitions and subdivisions, now all get they all get decided at the staff level with notice. So it basically pushes it to type 2 instead of type 3, which comes to the planning commission. So those applications are now taken out of planning commission purview statewide, which I would think wouldn't really jive well with goal 1, but that's how they went with it. But yes, so there's still things that there's still development applications that will come here. So it's limited land use would just be your site-specific projects. So there still are ones that would come here, like if there's a conditional use involved, variance, those aren't considered limited land use decisions, but the other ones are. So the short of it is you'll probably see drafts of ordinances where we're evaluating which of our processes are limited land use, which of them aren't, and those will come forward. But I just wanted to make sure you're hearing it from us and hearing what's going on before you just start seeing that those projects aren't coming to the commission anymore. So that's what I got. If you've got questions for me, for the messengers, shoot away.
All right. Well, thanks for the heads up.
That's what I got.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Zoning. I know you've done a lot of talking already. Is there any staff updates other than what we've talked about here today? Staff news updates, project updates, anything notable?
Doing a lot of stuff with the UGB.
Yeah.
Busy.
Nothing? All right. The commission have any community-related comments, announcements, questions?
Good.
Good.
Nothing.
Connie's not here to tell us anything.
She should be starting soon about 4th of July stuff.
Yeah, it should be soon. All right then, well, with that, is there anything else for the good of the order? Nope. Then I adjourn this meeting at 7:57 p.m.